Hi, everyone. Welcome to Here for the Health of It podcast. I'm Dr. Randy here with Dr. Tom, and we have a great show for you today. We have another podcaster, a local Columbia podcaster here with us from the All About Nothing podcast, and it is Barrett Gruber. He's going to talk about all types of things from what they talk about on the show. They're in a big political season right now, so tons of political hosts, guests, opinions, and we get into it all here. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Go check us out on Here for the Health of It podcast.com, or you can check us out on Instagram or anywhere, pretty much anywhere that you can get podcasts. You'll find us there. Thanks.
So this room would have been where someone was being adjusted.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it used to be a kitchen in the old, when we bought this place. It was like a chemical plant, but I don't know, like it was built out like a kitchen, I think.
It was like abandoned for 15 years.
Yeah.
Hard
so
to
this
tell.
would,
When
we designed the building, it was designed to be a podcast room. So no one's ever been adjusted in here. We had got the whole every single part of it.
Yeah,
we left up like some bricks so that we didn't have to get a new permit.
Yeah.
Everything else.
I was gonna say it looks. I was telling it looks far better than what it did on the Google Street Maps.
Yeah, because depending on which street map you look at, like one's like the new, and then like the other side is
like from different roads.
Yes, from different roads.
I had to complain because we got that one fixed, but the
Yes.
Didn't do it.
And we still haven't gotten signs up. We just got our door sign up today.
Oh, congratulations!
As you were walking in, I think.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, that was the guy I was taking.
Congratulations!
All right.
Oh, the guy who was getting into his truck.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Is podcasting your full time?
No. I work as I do quality assurance software testing for insurance software company called Duck Creek.
Oh.
And so like property and casualty, that sort of thing.
That's really?
Yeah.
Tom loves the insurance world.
I do.
Oh.
Property and casualty, not so much. I like the whole life.
I used to work in benefit administration. I was a primary analyst for the Benefit First company over on Fernandina Road. And prior to that, I worked at Blue Cross Blue Shield, working in like provider services. So.
Yes, which is a pain in the ass for us.
Oh yeah.
Why? We might need to talk about it on the show. I mean, because I just don't understand why Blue Cross Blue Shield, as big as it is, it's so hard to do anything with them.
So I work primarily in Medicare.
Yeah.
But just as difficult. I mean, and honestly, anytime a doctor's office would call in and say like, why are my bills not? Why can't I get paid? Why can't Medicare pay me? Whatever. I'm just like, your diagnosis codes, man. If you look at your ICD-10. Look at your procedure codes and match them.
Yeah.
And the money will come in,
And that's always, was that kind of like the scripted canned answer for you guys?
No, the scripted canned answer was your billing department needs to go back to your ICD-910 books and take care of that.
Gotcha.
But I was the only time I ever had any like disgruntled doctor's office was a podiatrist out in Myrtle Beach. And he would call in, and the first thing he would say was he'd recognize my voice, despite the fact that I gave an introduction. I was like, Medicare Customer Services, Barrett, how can I help you? And he'd go, where the fuck is my money? And I go, hey, Dr. Townsend, how you doing today? He'd go, I just need to know where my money is. And I said, well, let's check. When did you submit those claims? And he'd be like, I submitted them 3 days ago. And I was like, did you submit them electronically? And he's like, yeah, I did. I said, great. It's going to be 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I said, do you want me to check, see how they're doing? Because in the system, you could already check. And he'd be like, yeah, check, see how they're doing. I said, they've already failed. And he goes, well, why did they fail this time? I said, well, you didn't include any ICD-9 codes this time. And then he would yell at me. At one point, actually one of the phone calls that I got QA'd on, he says, he goes, he had a real bad attitude. So I was giving it back a little bit to him, but I was being real friendly about it.
Right.
And that particular phone call got QA'd by our like QA department.
Yeah.
Like, so I get this thing in the mail, and I get this thing in my mailbox saying that I had failed a QA because I was being and what they wrote down was I was being cunt to them. And I looked at it and I go, I said, someone should QA this. Because I don't think
HR this.
Yeah. Went back to him and they were like, oh, we meant to put Kurt. Kurt was what you were being. But he just had a real bad attitude. And he said, I've been a pediatrist he said, I've been a doctor for 15 years. And I said, well, you're a pediatrist.
Yeah.
But, you know.
How were they submitted? Were they like submitting? Because our software doesn't allow us to submit anything without the proper information.
I don't know.
Like when I think of like handwritten notes are just
at the time. I think his
faxed
billing
in.
department was run by a couple toddlers.
Yeah.
And you know, so ultimately, because he was the one calling, I had to suspect that the reason that he didn't know what was going on was
Right.
because these people weren't telling him.
Right.
So, you know, you live and learn.
Yeah.
Insurance always seems like a scam.
Yeah. Well, okay. So my opinion on insurance is it is a scam. I'm paying into something that a mass of people are all paying into at the same time. Very few people actually do anything to collect on any of the insurance.
Right.
And then when you do, you have to fight them for it. My daughter's literally having surgery tomorrow to remove a piece of metal and screws from where she broke her arm 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And insurance company calls and they said, well, it's January, so you haven't met your deductible. And I was like, yeah, I know. And they said, so this is going to be the total plus the $800 for deductible for the year. And I said, yeah, I know. They said, you want to talk about it at all? And I was like, no, I get it. I said, there's no way for me to like say, just happen to recognize that $26,000 was paid into insurance last year. And for some reason, you all can't just go, well, because you've been with us for however many years. It's the same as a car insurance.
Right.
What's this idea of a deductible? And then you're going to have adjusters that have to, the whole thing is
crazy
nonsense.
It really is.
There's no way to get around it either.
Yeah.
I was watching a thing on Instagram that was talking about if you go to a pharmacy, there would be the cash price that is, let's say $2.
Yeah.
And then if they find out that you have insurance, they are not allowed to tell you the cash price.
Right.
And they have to bill you the full insurance price, which might be $16. And then your deductible or your copay is $8. So if you walked in there and said, I have no insurance, you'd pay $2. If you walk in and say you have insurance, you pay $8. And then the insurance pays another $8.
It is easily one of the biggest scams that's ever gone on, I think.
Yeah.
I saw a video where these two guys were. It was a satire comedy sort of skit where these two guys were coming up how they were going to take care of themselves for like the rest of their lives, and insurance was what they come up with. It was basically, so this is the deal. We're going to convince people that they have to pay into something that is going to take care of them if something happens to them. And he says, "Oh, that sounds great. That sounds like something we should, that people be taken care of." And he said, "But here's the catch. They're going to get hurt. And then we're going to tell them that wasn't covered. And then we're going to convince them they have to keep paying us." Yeah.
That's so true.
Just ridiculous.
So I guess tell us about your podcast. I guess I'll tell everyone.
Quick
Intro.
Yeah.
10 minutes in. We're on the Here for the Health of It podcast. We are doing a co-podcast with the All About Nothing podcast, which we've had beef with you for a while.
See, and I didn't know we had beef.
Oh, we've had big beef. You know the saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer?
Oh, that's fair.
That's why we're
fair.
doing this.
I accept.
But we thought we were a shoo-in for the Best of Columbia podcast. We were basically thought we were guaranteed number one.
Do you know how much money it costs to pay an entire Indian call center to go out and vote? It's not cheap. So 2024, that's my suggestion.
That's good.
So tell everyone kind of your name. I'm Dr. Randy. I'm here with Dr. Tom. And then tell everyone how your podcast got started and what it looks like.
So my name is Barrett Gruber. I actually moved here from Atlanta. I worked in radio and TV for years before I moved here and figured out that there is no money to be made in radio TV unless you are quite literally the morning show. After 2016 election where Donald Trump got in, I recognized that where I worked as my full-time job at the time, I couldn't voice my opinion because there were a number of people around me that had different opinions. They were allowed to voice theirs.
Right. Interesting.
And so I decided that I guess I was going to take advantage of the equipment that I already had. So every Wednesday night, Thursday night, I would sit down in front of a microphone and basically just a stream of consciousness about some of what I had seen in the news or things like that. I would just go ahead and just record something and put it out there. I mean, at the time I was literally, and Brad may know, but I was literally just writing the XML code to publish it out to I was storing all of the media files on my own server.
Really?
And then I guess COVID hit, and the election of 2020 came around, and the show was pretty much political. So we call it the All About Nothing, but it's almost always about something.
Right.
I know that I think in the free times when we won Best of Columbia, that they said that it was kind of like Seinfeld, and that shows about nothing seem to be entertaining. They're not. So essentially, it was always it wound up in 2020 being me and two other guys just sitting down and hashing out some of the news stories that we would read, and go over what our opinion on that would be, and we would have guests that either had the same opinion or different opinions. Currently, we're in another election year, so a lot of the guests that I have on right now are either politicians or people that have just been elected. We recently had the Mayor Blythewood on, Sloan Griffin, who is fantastic. Tim Miles in West Columbia, who is also a terrific guest and very knowledgeable about everything going on. We're going to have your Richland County coroner on very soon. Because we connected at an event recently where I didn't know she was the coroner because I worked at a radio station in rural Georgia where I had a morning show where I worked for the county coroner who ran the radio station. And the interview that I did with him for that job was on like a really warm August evening. I was sitting in the radio station with the station manager who was waiting for him to come in. She kept telling me, she said, he'll be here in just a minute. He was working an accident. He's on his way. I said, great. So he comes, he finally gets there about 45 minutes late. We're sitting down. We did the interview. Everything worked out. He offered me the job. He wanted me to come in the next morning to sit with the guy that was leaving. And I was perfectly fine with everything until we parted ways and I walked outside. And the 1987 LTD wagon was running in the parking lot.
Oh God!
And I walked back in and I said, "Hey, Sid, you left your car on." He goes, "Oh, don't worry about it. The air conditioner's running." And I said, "Hold on, what?" He said, "Well, I can't take the bodies to the morgue. We had to do your interview." I was like, "There's bodies in the morgue." Okay. So yeah, 2 bodies sitting in there.
No way.
That story carried me through the rest of my employment with that radio station.
That's funny. You know what? I feel like, does she do ads? I get her stuff on my Instagram a ton.
Yes. Well,
So
I don't know if they're ads,
Or just like,
but she's
boosting
definitely out there, like making. I've not had the conversation with her specifically on what her intentions are, but
right.
She's a Rutherford, and Rutherford's name carries a lot of weight in South Carolina. So I feel like her aspirations are probably further than just coroner. Not to say that coroner's not,
kind of entry, yeah.
I mean, to get paid to go around and investigate crime, death, seems kind of interesting.
And I always pictured coroners as being just like a really skinny, dorky guy in the back room. I know, and she's good looking too.
Not her.
Yeah, so she may have more aspirations because when I looked at her Instagram page, I found the same thing. I was like, this doesn't seem like what I think a coroner normally does or looks like. All right, and then I want to go back to this media thing because that was probably a real weird place to work in 2015 and 2016. And now I think it's pretty clear that most of the media is bought and paid for by the pharmaceutical companies. Yeah. And they're scared to say anything about any pharmaceutical company because they'll lose something like 80% of their advertising if they decide Have you seen the videos where they say "brought to you by Pfizer," "brought to you by Pfizer," and it's just one after the other, and they're just repeating the same thing. So then the trust in media, I think, has plummeted.
Yeah.
And which is fueling podcasts. I don't watch the media at all now. In fact, if you paid me to watch it, I would still would probably refuse to watch it.
I mean, I have a threshold, you know.
Well, how do you know what's true and what's not true? Because it's all being censored and bought by pharmaceutical companies.
That's a really good question. Honestly, I think that if it comes down to something doesn't sound like it makes sense, then I usually don't trust it. I mean, even like when it comes down to like political stuff, if I hear something or I read something that just sounds completely outlandish or just so far out in right field that it doesn't, it can't be true. You know, there's places you can research it, like news, AP or Reuters. Those are pretty credible sources when it comes to like what's being reported. So, you know, but you're right when it comes to like medication or advertisements or anything like that. I mean, you guys being chiropractors, like how often do you all recognize that, say, someone's been talked into some sort of pain medication that they don't really need?
Yeah, it's constantly.
The entire OxyContin.
Oh, for sure.
Epidemic.
Yeah. It's so ultimately, I think it really comes down to people having to do their own research to figure out what it is that you know. You can't watch some of this stuff on the news and put a lot of faith into. I mean, local reporting, I'll give you local reporting for the most part. You know, your TV stations and news radio stations, things like that here in Columbia. I think I have a lot more faith in what it is they're reporting. It's some of the side reports that I can tell they're kind of being forced into doing because everyone that works under whatever umbrella that is, and not to sound conspiratorial, but they're definitely, having worked in TV and news, radio and things like that, I recognize that there is a certain, there is a message that even when I worked in the 90s, like I was in radio and television in the 90s, and you know, there was always a message. One of the big radio stations I worked for in Atlanta was WKHX, and at the time was owned by ABC Disney. And I don't know if you remember. So ABC was the one that broke the story back in the mid 90s about the Firestone tires exploding while people were driving around. Do you remember any of that?
No, I don't.
Oh, how old are you guys?
I mean, he looks 50, but I just turned 40.
So there was Firestone was under fire for having tires that on the highway under less than extreme conditions would potentially explode and cause accidents, and there were deaths and things like that. So I worked for a news agency that was trying to do a report on that was owned by ABC Disney. Yeah. And at the time, the idea was we want to show how these tires explode. Well, we couldn't. We were at the BMW test track up in Gainesville.
Yeah.
And Greenville. That's a Georgia address, Gainesville. But at one point they literally were trying to shove firecrackers into drilled holes to try and get these tires to explode, because it wasn't that they were trying to say, yes, these tires are bad and this is why you shouldn't get them. But what they were trying to do was showing, you know, how far along or what extreme conditions existed for these tires to explode. Couldn't do it. Huh. It just wouldn't happen. So there wasn't any there. It almost killed the story. Food Lion's a big grocery store here in South Carolina. It's a big grocery store across the Southeast, from Virginia all the way to Texas. Sure. And at one time, Food Lion was considered one of the largest grocery store chains, and they were so successful that the home city of Salisbury, North Carolina, had more millionaires per capita than any other city, or in the country. And then there was a report about bad meat at Food Lion, crushed Food Lion, and that was mostly because there was an interest in making Food Lion look bad by the news media. Really? And that hurt them a lot. They've come back pretty good, but that was a big thing, and it hurt them.
Right. The amount of control is pretty wild when it comes to media. I mean, and it never became, it was never apparent to me outside of the last decade. Like I never was a news person. My grandparents were big always on the, always watching the news, both at 5 and 6 o'clock or whatever it was. And then again at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I just never understood the point of it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
even if it was like, oh, so-and-so got murdered on this street, it was like, I don't know if I want to know that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if I don't know that, nothing ever changed my life with the news. So with your show, how do you pick and choose like how much and what do you look at to, I guess, take and create your opinions?
So I was born and raised in Atlanta, and I have parents that are very liberal, very Democrat liberal. Have always supported the Democrats. I moved to South Carolina, and my first marriage was into a family that was very conservative.
Interesting.
And at the time, while I didn't necessarily agree with some of their views, I did sort of find that I meandered into agreeing with them on certain things. And ultimately what I came to realize is I can be a social liberal while also being a fiscal conservative.
Sure.
So a lot of my opinions on some of the things that go on in our nation and in our world are from what I believe is a more centered area.
Yeah.
You hear moderate or you hear, centered, but those still tend to try and attach themselves to parties.
Sure.
The idea that when a president will, like Biden ran on a very liberal campaign policies and things like that, and then of course when he gets into office, he winds up having to center himself,
right?
Because you're not just representing that party, you're representing the entire country. So for me, when I look at news stories and things like that, I try to assess what sort of who does this benefit?
Yeah.
Is it for the benefit of people that need to be benefited of, or is it designed to benefit a candidate or a specific corporation or something like that? And so I try to take that into account, because in my head, corporations are always going to be the bad guys.
Right.
Not they aren't, but that's just sort of where my head winds up going. But I look at stories and things like that wind up drawing the most emotion out of me.
Gotcha.
And that's how I generally try
decide
what I talk about or report on.
Nice.
Ron DeSantis dropping out of the presidential candidacy, don't really care. But what effect does that have on South Carolina? Because Nikki Haley, who I didn't think was a bad governor in South Carolina,
right,
I thought she was a decent governor. She didn't do a whole lot to change. She did have a pretty serious natural disaster under her belt when she was governor, with all the historic flooding and everything. And I thought she handled that pretty well. It's pretty easy to do when your staffs are all when the emergency management's all funded well,
right?
And you have town councils and governors and mayors and things all over the place that are doing their jobs efficiently. But my suspicion is that after Nevada's primaries, she will probably drop out. So what effect does that have on South Carolina?
Right.
Does that mean that we have to have a primary at the end of February for one candidate that's still running?
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
And as myself, I am very passionate about voting. Everyone should vote, and I feel like there's not enough education when it comes to voting. So the next time we record, one of the subjects that we'll talk about is specifically the effect of having one candidate on both ballots, or from both parties. We've never been this early in the primary season for there to only be one candidate for both parties.
Interesting.
It's weird.
And I love the idea of podcasts with political, like big name political people being on them, because you can hear them for an hour and a half actually hash out what their policies are and what they believe. I think Joe Rogan started doing that, and it was amazing to sit there and listen to like a Bernie Sanders or an RFK who if the only other place that you would really see them is on the news, and you knew it was filtered. I always just watch the news, and like kind of your point, we play this game with the news where someone lies. You watch someone say something, and then you play this game where you're like, are they lying or are they not lying? And realizing, wait a minute, I'd rather just listen to this person talk for an hour and a half than 2 minutes in a filtered little news cycle that, you don't know if it's true or it's not, or it's been edited or it hasn't been edited.
I want to know where these candidates grew up, what sort of environment they grew up in,
Right.
like what was their family life like. I want to hear conversations where somebody's trying to go in depth on who the person is and not necessarily just what they believe in policies, because the policy thing for me is the weakest part. That's where I don't necessarily believe that they'll get into office and they'll say we're gonna fix this or we're gonna fix that. Okay, you're gonna fix this, but why is it that you want to fix this? How, you show me the reason for what it is that you want to do. Why? And I think you can get a lot of that idea of what a person represents if you get them to discuss how they develop these opinions. What was the environment they grew up in? You talked about big candidates. Marianne Williamson is running for president against Joe Biden right now. I had her on our show back in June.
Nice.
And ultimately, I enjoyed talking to her. I think when it comes to policies and things, I think I agree with her fundamentally on a lot of the issues that she's running on. But Biden already represents a lot of those.
Right.
When it comes to, he believes that healthcare should be available for everybody. Yeah, I do too. She believes the same. She believes that our military is probably a little bit enlarged and we spend a lot more money on it than she thinks. And I agree with that. Is it the right time for Marianne Williamson to run? No, there's already an incumbent, and there's very little hope. And now what's happening is you're forcing, and then you got this other Dean Phillips out there who's running it too, but you're forcing a party that doesn't have a lot of money for campaigning for a president who's already incumbent. You're forcing that party to now run primaries in states across the country that's spending that money.
Just pointless spending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, I think that's one of the issues that I have with campaigning in general. I love the way the UK does it. You get this allotted amount of time to start your campaign, and then it finishes before the election, and there's nothing before that.
That is interesting.
It's nice. Well, and it used to be, because I'd be interesting where her stance is, that the right side was always wanting to go to war. And because I remember growing up and it was like George Bush taking everybody to war, and now it seems like it's switched where now maybe the left side wants to go to war more. I can't figure out what side is doing what, or where to have a stance.
Yeah, I think the fundamentals of where both parties stand on that still is pretty much the same. So Republicans want a small Republicans, when I grew up, always wanted a small military, but send it everywhere. The Democrats wanted a large military and send it nowhere, because ultimately they're both subscribed to this idea that the military complex still requires us to keep building. But yeah, that was, and you can kind of see it in Trump's campaigns now. He wants to make sure that the war in Ukraine is done. He wants to make sure the war in Israel and Palestine is done, that those are done. He doesn't want there to be a war during his presidency. And I support that. I don't want there to be a war. I'd prefer that everybody just got along.
Yeah.
But so that kind of feeds into the idea that, Republicans want this really large military that they can, or smaller military with the best technology that they can send everywhere, but not be because we're at war, just the idea that we're just dominating by size and technology. And then the Democrats, we haven't sent troops into Israel. We haven't sent troops into Ukraine because ultimately the Democrats don't want to send the troops into different locales for a war.
Right.
Where do we benefit?
So when you have guests on that say you differ in their opinion completely, how does that go? How does that normally, how do you, control yourself? What does that look like?
It just, so we ask a lot of guests to come on that have different opinions. My state senator Katrina Shealy is someone that I would really like to have on the show. I've tried to get Joe Wilson, who's the congressman that represents us. They won't come on.
Really?
And ultimately I try to express, I'm very fair. So essentially in the situation where someone comes on that has a different opinion, I want them to tell us why they have a different opinion.
Right.
Don't give me a bunch of talking points or what you've seen somebody else give. I want to know why it is you feel the way you do.
Yeah.
And honestly, if there's a good reason for it, which it's not for me to judge, I just want to hear it, and
Sure.
I'd like for everyone to hear it.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that situation, different opinions I think make for the most interesting conversation.
That's what I always think. I always go back to like, why, if you, even in health, like in our world in healthcare, like we are on the opposite side of most healthcare type of issues and debates and different things. And I'm always open to talking about those. In other words, like if we feel strongly, like we were talking about medications and insurance and different things before the show or early on. And it's like, well, let's talk that out, whether somebody feels strongly about like just vaccination, for example. It's like, well, feel strongly about vaccination, then let's talk about the points of like people, or let's hear why maybe we don't need such a strong stance on vaccines. Same with politics. I don't understand why there isn't just more of that, the communicating at a civil level and just talking out like, why do you believe this way? And letting them be okay to say like, I don't know.
I think a lot of the reason that we don't hear that there is good communication going on between politicians and things like that is because it doesn't make for good television.
Yeah.
There's a representative out of North Carolina, Jeff Jackson. I'm sure everybody's seen his TikToks. He's very forthcoming. He's very transparent. But one of the things that he has expressed in his TikToks, which I have heard from friends that work in Washington, D.C., is that when the cameras are on, that's when the Marjorie Taylor Greens are batshit.
Right.
But as soon as the cameras are off, everybody's maybe not her, but they all come together and they're all
Kinda
working
talk,
to try and move legislation along. And I think ultimately the media has created this
right.
when there isn't that infighting going on or when there isn't the stability, it doesn't make for good television. So you can't constantly have a banner running across the bottom of CNN saying, Lauren Boebert was, in a movie theater and got caught, whatever.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make
Good
for good
point.
television.
Yeah.
Well, and even the Nancy Pelosi thing with how much money she's made, I always hear about that, and it's just a good talking point.
Yeah.
But then there's never anything further where I can figure out, is she really that good at investing that she can just be worth hundreds of millions of dollars?
And if she's in Congress, my opinion is she shouldn't be allowed to be doing this sort of investing.
100%.
There's too much. Look, when Bernie Sanders, and I was a Bernie Sanders guy, mostly because I believe that Medicare is one of the greatest things that the United States has created because it does what it's supposed to do, but it operates with less than a 2% overhead cost. My insurance, 85 cents of every dollar that goes into my insurance or that I pay towards a premium is going to pay for board members and travel and bonuses and things like that. And that to me is absurd.
That's insane.
85% is wild.
15 cents is going towards medicine.
Paying out their medical.
Yeah.
Wow.
Dang.
No wonder they have to reject everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous. But Bernie Sanders, when he was running, and this was, I guess this was in the second election, but he had written a book. Well, he signed a book deal, and whatever the book deal was for, it pushed him over the I'm now a millionaire. And for weeks, that's all people talked about was, well, Bernie Sanders is a millionaire, but he's running on this platform that equality and financial equality and things like that. And it's like, he wrote a book.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if he wrote the book. I just know that there is a book with his name on it.
Yeah.
And it's like, he achieved that. I'm not going to be upset at him for the fact that, he's now considered a millionaire. But it's the same thing. If I don't know, I can't, what's the senator out of Tennessee or Kentucky that, pauses on himself. McCarthy.
Mitch McConnell.
Yeah. If Mitch McConnell went out there and wrote a book, and they said
there's a logic.
Yeah.
I would say that's what I think. If there's a logical means to where the money comes from, it's like that. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
But the illogical stuff, like how are they getting these hundreds of billions of dollars? It is nuts. And what do we do about it? Like back to your point on voting and voting being important. I don't understand what we do to change America. And I want to know your opinion on like, what do you say to people that are convinced that voting is rigged and that we even if we vote, it doesn't matter because of the behind the scenes, Wicked Witch of the West that's controlling things.
So your first question, I don't know. I don't know how to fix it.
It's a mess.
Yeah.
But they shouldn't be able to invest when
No,
Nancy
they make
Pelosi
the
says
rule.
I
They
should
make
be
the rules.
Yes, I
Yeah.
should be able to invest just like anybody else.
Mm-mm.
Well, wait, you're the person who's deciding
Yeah.
if a company is
Espe-
operating as a monopoly or not. You're
Especially if it comes down
2
to like
weeks-
General Electric is one of the largest Department of Defense contracts in the United
Yes.
States. And if I found out that, and I don't think this is the case, but if I found out that Nancy Pelosi's husband was sitting on the board at General Electric, that's a conflict of interest.
Right.
And ultimately, I think money should be taken. If there was some way of doing it, money being taken out of politics.
Right.
If you could take away the corporate interests of what goes on in politics, and then I mean, look at the roads. I mean, construction around here in Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah.
These contractors that get these jobs to build the highway, to update the highways and things like that, I'm all for it because infrastructure is important. But like on my side of town, there's one intersection between Highway 1 and I-20 that has now been being worked on for almost 7 years. It's 3 years over time.
Yeah.
The project is 3 years over time and millions over budget. Had you gone with a contract bid that would have guaranteed completion, even if it's a little bit more expensive, we've already surpassed whatever that next bidder was.
Right.
And ultimately it's like, these are no nonsense things. These are, they in Georgia, Interstate 85, there was a section of it that burned and collapsed. And a construction company came in and said, we'll get it done in 8 weeks. This is going to be the price tag to get it done in 8 weeks. The state of Georgia said, let's do it. If you can get it done in 8 weeks, let's do it. They got it done in 6 weeks. They were under time and they got paid their full budget. And it was taken care of. And ultimately that's a major thoroughfare through Atlanta.
Yeah.
That's necessary. And they got it fixed.
Yeah.
So, this idea of just going with the lowest bidder on something is something I think that we have to move ourselves away from. We want the job done right. Sometimes it's going to cost money.
Yes.
Your second question was about voting.
Yes. And the fraud or whatever people are,
Yeah. I think that's a lot of cloak and dagger stuff. So one of the things that I do is as an attempt to understand as much as I can about the process of voting is that I also work polls. So I am a poll clerk in Lexington for one of the precincts over there.
Nice.
I've been doing it since 2020. And so specifically, I did it for that election because there was an email that came out, or there was a Facebook post that said that the election commission needs poll workers.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I have PTO. I can certainly work the polls and do that. And so I did that. And we had one of our precinct in Lexington County had one of the highest turnouts for the 2020 election, but it was handled. There was virtually no discrepancies when it came to the voting. So understanding the process and how everything works, it's you're voting electronically, but there's a paper trail.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of the information that you hear on the news about how the claims that there is voter fraud.
Yeah.
The only and I actually just recorded an episode yesterday with a friend who's got another podcast called Welcome to Wonderland, where Ami does sort of a deep dive into subjects that people ask questions about. And so yesterday she wanted me to sit in and explain voting. And one of the things that I explained was that when it comes to the actual process of voting, our voting is extremely secure. There is, when you walk in, you hand someone your driver's license, they scan it, they ask you to repeat your address, they're looking at your picture. The system's not corrupted. The actual checking and registering people in is extremely efficient, and it's handled at the state level as well as the county level. Mm-hmm. And if there is a discrepancy between the information that's on their driver's license versus what's in the registry versus potentially, what they're telling you,
right,
then we can hold them aside and just get them to explain it to us. And if they explain it to us, as the clerk, the guy that's running it, and they explain it to us well enough, then we can say, okay, yeah, legitimately, you should be voting in this election. You should be voting in this precinct. This is the issue that comes up is I don't think, as far as the process goes, people understand their responsibility to voting.
Yeah.
And making sure your registration's up to date. Here in South Carolina, we've had districts that have moved and changed, so people's precincts potentially going to move. I think one of the things that we lack is that there isn't enough pushing for voter education, telling people check your registration now, check your registration a month before the election, so that you can just walk in, everything runs smoothly, you vote and you walk out.
Yeah.
As a precinct clerk, I've had usually what the biggest issue that we have is that we have people that show up that don't know where they're supposed to vote,
Right.
Or they showed up at an old precinct and their address is somewhere else.
I could see that a lot. Yeah.
But ultimately the idea is that everyone should be able to vote. If you are of legal age and you are registered, then you should be allowed to vote. And as a clerk, that's the reason I really got into it, was because I wanted to make sure that
See what it's like.
yeah. And from my level, just to being able to make sure that everyone could actually vote.
Right.
Well,
so we hear things like people don't have identification, for
Yeah,
example.
that happens.
Is that so that's a thing?
Yeah.
How are they not turned away without some sort of identification?
They are.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Yeah, they are. If they don't have any ID at all,
Yeah.
What we can do is we can pull their name up in the system, and we can see, they can verify their address and everything like that. But if you don't have voter ID, or if you don't have some form of identification with your picture on it,
Yeah.
and the preference is either driver's license, state ID, voter registration, or potentially a passport, military
Sure.
ID, something official from the government. You can't walk in with like an employee ID or something like that.
Yeah. Is that consistent with the mail-in side of it? Because that's the thing that we heard the most about, was the mail-in ballots being.
So we don't have mail-in balloting here in South Carolina. We only have absentee balloting. And absentee, you have to submit an application to your county that will then so the county receives, you download and fill out an application, you send it in the county receives it, they review it, and they say, okay, is this a reason that the state believes you should be able to vote absentee? Then they will send you out an absentee ballot. When it comes to fraud with the absentee ballots here in South Carolina, it's really hard to prove that any of that goes on. And the only reason I say that is because you don't know when that absentee ballot's going to show up at your door.
Right.
Which means that someone literally would have to sit there and watch your mail to see if it's going to be sitting there. And then you go through, you open it up, you fill out the ballot, and then you fold it and you put it back in their envelope, you sign it, and then it goes into another envelope that gets signed and witnessed. Like, in South Carolina, you have to have a witness signature on your ballot, your absentee ballot, to mail it back. So that's now three signatures really that have basically said, yes, I understand this is my ballot and whatever. But it's just, to me, knowing how the system actually works, it would be so much trouble to change 10 or 15 votes to go, to sit there and watch like an entire neighborhood to pull out somebody's absentee ballot to change it.
I could see that. What about was it Wisconsin? What was the one that had the crazy statistical anomaly that was like, for this to happen, and I don't know what state it was. I'm thinking back to, I think it was the 2020 election. Something like they were running numbers for the amount of people that came in during this certain time period in the middle of the night or whatever the heck it was. That was like, for that statistically, it is impossible. It'd be like getting struck by lightning 100 times or something.
So let's say the precinct you vote in has 3,700 registered voters that could potentially show up on election day. You take away a certain number of those that vote absentee. You take away a certain number of those that just don't turn up. But ultimately, that 3,700 is the maximum number of votes. In some claims are that in some districts, there were votes that were far past whatever the threshold or the number of registered voters, which, would throw up a red flag, but it literally didn't happen anywhere. There wasn't anywhere that was reporting more votes than could have been voted for in a precinct. And, and that's, and the reason I know that is because in South Carolina, if Biden and Trump are the two that are running, we're going to see 50 to 55% of registered voters show up. It's not going to be everybody. And
Really?
yeah, no, it won't. I mean, we have a primary coming up in a couple of weeks for the Democratic primary. Well,
Yeah.
Joe Biden's already president.
Right.
Likelihood is we're going to see between 10 and 13% actually show up for that primary.
Gotcha.
Because what's the point?
Yeah.
It's it's nice that it's on Saturday, but nobody's going to show up to vote for something they know has already been decided.
Right. Are you allowed to vote this year?
So I just got my U.S. citizenship
Canadian.
December 28th.
Canadian.
I was Canadian.
Well,
now I have my U.S.
congratulations.
citizenship. Yeah. So I have to learn all this stuff. I have to figure out, because I just didn't. I heard it, but I didn't really. It didn't affect me because I wasn't going to do it. But when my wife would go vote, she had 2 weeks of early voting that she could go vote too. And I remember thinking this system is very good. If you can go, she would walk in a week early.
Yeah.
She'd be the only person there. And then she could do whatever she did. And then it was done with no line, no issue, at her convenience. And I know there's a lot of people that like to go on the day and vote on the day and wait in lines.
It's overrated.
But I never, when she was voting, I never felt like there was any sort of issue. But I do know someone who said that his grandfather got a mail-in vote in Pennsylvania, and his grandfather had been passed away for years.
And that's entirely possible. So I know that in South Carolina that the election offices work very closely with as far as like when someone passes away. I know that there were claims that dead people voted in the 2020 election and then in 2022. But when research was done into that, they found out that, yes, this person was dead on the day of the election, but they had mailed in their ballot signature
Beforehand.
and everything before they died.
Interesting.
So that was, and the worst part is people talk about voter fraud. The actual voter fraud is the stuff that doesn't ever make the headlines because it's not really interesting. It's something about, like that someone has made a claim about voter fraud based on the idea that this person passed away. Well, how does their vote count if they're dead on the day of the election? Well, they mailed it in. The only voter fraud that really stands out in the last 30 years was the one up in North Carolina where a state representative, his son and some friends went around and actually picked up people's absentee. They'd go to people's houses because they got a hold of the list of the people who were absentee voters, went to their houses to say, hey, if you haven't completed your ballot, then let us have it and we'll turn it in for you. They were going into those ballots, opening them very carefully, changing the votes and things like that.
Really?
Yeah. Well, he's running again. That guy in North Carolina. But yeah, I think voter fraud in an election makes up less than 0.5% of the actual votes that go on. And every single bit of it is investigated. Like they're very serious. It's a fraud. It's, you can go, you will do time.
Right. Cause I saw, I think it was something like 60% of the country thinks it's
crazy.
It's rigged or like it's a high percentage of people think there's no chance that
that's
voting.
Your media.
Right. It's
that's
wild.
Your media.
Right.
Well, and now, so since you were in the TV radio world, was there ever a time that they played or that you were aware of them making up videos or playing like actors during the COVID stuff? There was always that like hospitals are flooded and they're showing videos of, I guess, Italy. And then there were like, I love the conspiracy stuff, by the way, as you can probably tell. Then it was like, well, have you seen that ever where they used actors or they just like got a scene that just to make their point?
Yeah, not in my time.
Not in your time.
I never saw anyone purposely misleading a story in a direction just for, whether it's for their own personal growth or whether it was because they were told to do it. I never saw any of that.
Never saw that because I wonder. Yeah, I feel like with all the amount of people at the news, somebody would be like, "What are we doing here?"
Yeah, the only thing I ever did see was I worked at a news radio station in Atlanta that had several very conservative talk show hosts. The morning show that I worked on was a guy named Moby in the Morning, who on the radio was extremely conservative. Like it was police support here, military support here.
Yeah.
The idea that Democrats can't support military and police, I mean, they do. But that was his angle. That's how he would sing church hymns on the air. It was and it was the number one show for we held the number one spot for several years. But that was his persona on the air. Off the air, man, it was as blue a comedian as Bob Saget, or it was a complete flip. It was the Bob Saget, Danny Tanner, flip flop.
Yeah.
I worked at a radio station that had another very conservative news host who, off the air, he'd have to decompress after getting off the air because he was just like, it is so hard to sit here and play this character. It was like the Stephen Colbert.
Yeah.
It was like the Colbert Report.
Yes.
It was and even Colbert admitted after he was done with the Colbert Report, he was like, it was a show that ran its course because I couldn't keep up with it. I couldn't do it anymore because people would stop me on the street and they'd be like, they'd fist bump and be like, yeah, F the Democrats or whatever. And he's like, that's not me.
I think stuff like that does make you lose trust in the media when you hear that, because I think that about most media personalities.
Yeah.
Do they really think that or not? Are they just doing this for the ratings or not? Do they really believe what they're saying? And then you hear stories like that, and you're like, "Yeah, it's happening all the time."
Well, so voting in Canada, did you vote in Canada?
Oh yeah.
How is that different than in the United States?
So, it's interesting. In Canada, there's multiple different parties. It's not just a 2-party system like it is here,
as there should be.
So there's the extremes on each side. And then there's parties that are kind of all the way through the middle. And then based on the amount of votes that you get, that's the amount of power and seats that you get within the, what would be Congress there, within the legislature. So it doesn't turn into you get 51%, you get all the power. It turns into this extreme left party got 13%, this extreme right party got 4%.
Yeah.
These 2 middle parties got the rest. And then they all have someone representing them.
Gotcha.
And kind of arguing about it. And then they call it the official opposition. So there's the party that wins and then the official opposition. And it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit goofy how they do it. Have you seen videos of them?
A little bit.
They have like just all these traditions and routines and the way that they speak, and half of them are French and half of them are speaking English, and they have weird.
I'll be honest, if I was in the UK, I would be so offended at the idea that the people that are representing me, these MPs, these little, that they operate in what they call the House of Lords.
Yep.
That to me is like, it's one step too far. So I have to call them Lord, But
in Canada, there's similar things. Like there's Alberta, which is where I grew up. That would kind of be the Texas of Canada. I think it's like a lot of farmland and farmers, and there's not a ton of people that live there.
I don't think the farm and the farmers is what make Texas Texas. It's just a weird conglomerate of so for me, because I have family that lives in Texas, I have family that lives near Houston, Texas, and I have family that lives near Austin. And the difference between those 2 locations, like just based purely on politics, is so they are so far apart. It's uncomfortable.
Right.
Oh yeah. But it's similar in Canada too, where
I hear it now.
You have these extreme, like the immigration in Canada is insane.
Is it?
The people flooding into Canada, and it's usually during times of wars somewhere else. So like we had a big Syria influx, and we've had, I'm sure, Ukraine now, although I haven't lived there, but I'm sure Ukraine. And you end up getting all these big pockets of people that it's very different where you live. Like when I was in Winnipeg, there was a huge Filipino population. So you just got to know everything about the Filipino kind of culture. And then there was a East India in Calgary and Toronto. There's a whole bunch of people from India that are coming there. So then you get this whole different population.
Yeah.
And then Vancouver, of course, the West Side, a lot of people from Asia. So you have this thing where you're all one country, but you kind of have so many extremely different cultures in one area.
And I know South Carolina, especially, I know a lot of people don't agree with him, but I love the diversity. Like my neighborhood is made up. We've got Pakistani family that lives down on one end. We've got Indian families that live in there. My next door neighbor, they're from the Dominican Republic, and man, he makes the best Dominican sushi. All I have to do is mow his yard, and I get a plate
What is
of
Dominican
sushi.
sushi?
I think it's got I think it's instead of fish a lot of the time, there's
like
fish
meat?
and chicken.
Oh,
And
nice.
it's just spices, and it's fantastic.
I love
That-
cooked
so
sushi.
that is what I miss. One of the things I miss is that the food in the South is just the same fried food over and over.
There's only so many ways you can fry something and continue to call it chicken fried.
It's just so bad. It's also bad for you.
And that is
crazy.
100% true. Yeah, there you go. There's some Dominican sushi. Yeah, it's got chicken in it.
yeah, see, I'm into the cooked sushi.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's
I love sushi when it's cooked chicken.
and I can use a fork.
Do you like sushi? Yeah, but make it the kind where it's cooked chicken.
I put the rice on the side.
well, and sushi is just the way it's prepared. It's not necessarily like just fish or whatever. It's the fact that it's rolled with the rice and whatever other ingredients.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
but it's like I said, the diversity is what I really like, and I think South Carolina has become really, really good about diversity. There's so much there is we have so many festivals in Columbia now to celebrate all of the different ethnicities that we have here.
Yeah.
And the Korean festival was just was like a month and a half ago. And my children were exposed to Korean corn dogs, which I didn't know there was anything, but like they're obsessed with these things now. Like we're waiting for a Korean restaurant to open up in Lexington so that they can have them again.
What kind of meat are we talking about there?
I want to. Yeah, there you go. It's like cheese and hot dogs, and it was
Interesting.
They were huge fans, and yeah, we spent a lot of money that day.
dog chain, Korean corn dog chain.
Yeah,
I don't know what I went to Vietnam for we did a clinic abroad type thing, and we would go there and they would have meat, and I would ask them what type of meat is this, and they would say it's meat, and I'd say no, what kind of animal, and they'd just say meat.
Yeah,
and I was sitting there thinking, do they just not understand English to know what I'm asking, or do they just know that I don't want to know the answer to whatever they're going to say?
Pay no attention to the D on the DHEC board over here. That's not a D. That's not a D. Yeah, Vietnam's not one I've been to. I did do Hong Kong. I was in Hong Kong for a week when I was a teenager, and I was exposed to, and I can't remember what it's really called, but basically it was a chicken embryo that when you open it up, it's basically the chicken. It's not an egg, and
that's like a delicacy too, right?
So there was a McDonald's in our lobby that we ate there the rest of the. I made sure it was McDonald's the rest of the week.
Oh, see, that's traumatizing to me.
I
Cracking an egg and seeing like a
full chicken,
baby chicken in there. Oh.
I love the thing that I loved about. I've been to Asia a couple times. I'm so tall there that it's just amazing.
Yeah, Randy likes to adjust. He sits on a different stool to make him appear higher too. I was wondering in your podcast if you do stuff like that.
I wanted to lower yours. I asked Brad, can you make his seat any lower?
Cuts the
I
wheels
slouch. I'll just make sure that I slouch a little bit.
But I haven't had to tell you to get closer to the mic at all. So
this is a professional thing.
Yeah, you know what you're doing.
We it's usually it's one fist away from the microphone is and if for some reason I can't hear myself, I know I've maneuvered too far over to the left.
Right.
Do you have to tell guests constantly to get closer to the microphone?
Yeah. So we had one guest that came in, and unfortunately, due to her size, she couldn't get up close to, and we couldn't get the microphone close enough to her. So I just said, do me a favor, just can you hold on to it, and just that way it's right there. Yeah. And she did for about 3 minutes and then, before it was back on the table and you couldn't really hear her. But I've gotten to the point where it's not necessarily they're not going to feel one way or the other about it. Guests, if they want to, most of the time guests want to be the best that they can be, and that means being able to be heard. Which is ultimately the only thing I care about is the quality of the sound outside of the content. So yeah, there are those times where you have to go, do me a favor, just crawl a little closer up to that microphone, lean over. It's
That's one of Randy's favorite things to say. He always.
I've seen.
I love
I've seen.
interrupt.
Loves it.
And I
He
try
loves
to
it.
interrupt it when they're trying to make a point and just say that
Let me
too.
stop you right there.
But it was literally every single time I would re-listen to it in my truck, and I'd be like, oh, I hope that I remembered to tell them to get closer to the microphone because I can't hear it. And then sure enough, I would hear myself pop on, get closer,
So
and the
you
sound
guys-
would get better.
You guys go back and listen to your episodes.
Most of them, yeah.
Do you?
There's been a handful that I don't. Like I'll throw it in the car.
I don't ever.
Really?
I never
Yeah.
like. I'll get like a message or something like that and be like, oh man, that was really great when you asked this question and they said this or whatever. Da da da. And I was like, I don't remember
I
that.
don't even know it. Yeah.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, oh yeah, no, you said this and they said this, and I was like, you didn't go back and listen. No,
Yeah.
I don't like.
Yeah.
I have demos from when I was in radio back in like 97, 98 that I put on like a resume website that if the situation ever came up where I found like a morning a weekend like gig or something like that, they don't have to pay me. I just want to do something
get
on
on
the
there.
air. But like a friend of mine said that she went out and listened to it, and she said it was really cool listening to you from your voice sounds exactly the same as it did in 1997. And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah. Professional training.
That's right. Good
Thanks,
voice.
Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
Is that yes? Well, actually, tell me how to get professional training in this.
So I enlisted. I enrolled at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting back in '97, and it was run by a couple of really great guys. They had satellite offices or schools or whatever all over the country, and so the one that I did was in Marietta, outside of Atlanta. I can't remember the two guys' names that ran it, but they were really good. They did a lot of training with us on breathing techniques. Like you never want to breathe into the microphone. If you have to, if you have to take a big breath, just turn your head away from the microphone.
right.
It's real simple.
Yeah.
But
Coughing. What about coughing into the microphone?
What about this?
we had cough buttons.
That's not ideal.
I do a lot of this.
Do you?
And this.
Yeah, drinking water. There was a phase where he would drink coffee. He would bring coffee and drink it in the mic. He would,
so it was
like
a
he
lot of
wouldn't
the,
bring his head to
yeah.
the side. He would drink it. Yeah, yes, that's the exact sound.
It doesn't. I don't know that it takes away, especially like for most people listening. They don't really pay attention to those little things. Those are the things that we, as the ones trying to create, are very attuned to hearing it. And honestly, even, I think one of the things I think is funny is like, I do usually watch a lot of the monologues for the late night TV hosts and whatnot.
Yeah.
And some of them will emphasize just how much, like if you listen to a Trump speech, it's like constantly, like you'd think his septum was deviated or that he was a cocaine freak or something
Right.
like that. But based on everything I know about Donald Trump, he's never touched a drug in his life. He's never touched alcohol. And kudos to him for that.
Yeah.
So I know that him breathing like that isn't because he's been shoving, white powder up there.
Right.
I think it's just he likes breathing through his nose, and he talks so long, and it's such a fluid, like conscious, like just rolling.
No periods.
That he's got to take in some air at some time, or he's
No
going to suffer
commas,
from
no
some
period.
sort of a stroke.
I don't know how politicians in the U.S. are just so old.
Oh God.
That
I
is
was
a
looking at a
problem.
meme where it was saying that normally in our industry, once you hit about 80 years old in the medical industry, you're kind of forced into retirement, and then
Okay.
the next crew comes in.
Yeah.
I don't. If you told me that there was an 83-year-old surgeon that was going to work on me, I would say, is there like a 50-year-old with 30 years of experience,
yeah.
not an 82-year-old with 64 years of experience? But when you look at all our politicians right now, they're all in their 80s. It seems like.
Yeah, so I've almost always been of the opinion that there should be term limits
Yes.
to how long someone can be in office. But then I also recognize that, politicians like Donald Trump, well, I guess he wasn't a politician up until a few years ago, or 10 years ago or whatever, but like Joe Biden, while I don't agree with everything about Joe Biden, I recognize that there is value in the time that he has served in politics, because that in my eyes, he knows, and sometimes good or bad, but he knows where and how things get done and how to work with the party that you oppose. So there's a statesman-like quality to that. And I look at that as like Mitch McConnell. I don't agree with a lot of what Mitch McConnell does or says, but I recognize that there is value to how long he's been in the Senate and how long he's been a politician. But honestly, no one else is going to learn that until they're gone.
Right.
And even if we go through a year or two of someone having to learn that, how to become that statesman politician, basically what we're doing is we're the inevitable is going to happen, and these politicians are going to pass away, and there might be a void because they didn't pass that on to somebody else. Yeah, but do you invoke some sort of an age limit on politicians? I
like that idea.
I do too. And you I feel like Joe Biden over 40 or 50 years, you owe too many favors to too many people.
That's valid.
To be partial, because the guy that helped you get your first thing, he's going to come knocking, and then the guy that helped you win that election, he wants a little favor too, and then the person who gave you a big slice of your donor money, he's going to have an opinion too, and all of a sudden you have 40 years worth of people that you owe favors to. It's hard to just do the right thing.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of brings me to this. Like, I want your opinion on this. Who do you really think is making decisions? Is Joe Biden really making who has the power right now?
So decisions being made. So the president of the United States, I don't think has an effect on as much as what people think they do.
That's kind of how I look at it.
When it comes to decisions like that the president can make, that's why he has a cabinet. He has a cabinet of individuals who are either experts in their field or experts in whatever it is, or they are people that are chosen that based on their experience. And unfortunately, sometimes that experience lends to the idea that they could potentially be in somebody's pocket.
Yeah.
But that's the idea, is that decisions the president makes are not necessarily unilateral. They're made based on how his he makes the ultimate decision, but the cabinet assists in those decisions.
And the cabinet is chosen just by the president, right?
Yeah.
We have no say in
Correct.
putting who we want.
Yeah. The vice president's the only one that we vote for.
Gotcha.
We vote for a president, but we're voting for the president and the vice
Same
president.
time,
They run
yeah,
together.
yeah.
But so the president chooses their cabinet, but the cabinet has to be confirmed by the Senate. And the Senate is 100 individuals that are representing the states.
Gotcha.
So because, so the idea is that, as long as they're not wackadoos, then, you have individuals in there.
Does that happen often where the Senate turns down a cabinet?
I don't know. Let's wait till 2025 when this election's over. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Well, because I always heard that too, but then I remember both 2020 and 24, both presidents started signing executive orders like crazy.
Yeah.
And then it was, one or two to me would make sense on your first day. Signing 85 executive orders on your first day, one way or the other, it seems insane.
Well, and then Biden came in and signed executive orders to undo executive orders that Trump had done. Trump came in and signed executive orders to undo what Barack Obama had done previous. That Barack did the same. Obama did the same thing to Bush. Because I think one of the big ones that I agreed with as far as the executive order was this Keystone Pipeline coming out of Canada.
I'm from Canada. That was insane that they stopped that.
Well, but the crazy thing is there are people out there that think that there's no oil flowing from Canada through the United States to a port in New Orleans, Louisiana. That so ultimately the Keystone Pipeline is still running. Essentially, what they wanted to do was divert the Keystone Pipeline so that it could run faster and hit a couple other places before it got down. See, and almost none of that oil is being sold here in the United States. None of that oil does anything in the United States. It's all being shipped to China and India,
I just can't wrap my head around politics at all.
I don't understand the oil either, where
we have it, but we're selling it, and then we're buying it from somebody else.
Well, it wasn't us selling it. It was the Canadians that were selling it. The Canadians, we were just that was the best path from, is it not, it wasn't Alberta, but it was
Alberta's big.
Yeah.
Alberta and Saskatchewan.
But it was oil that Canada was shipping through the United States to sell
Gotcha.
overseas.
Yeah.
It might be being run by a corporation or, whatever. That's who's selling it, and they may have interest in the United States, but that's essentially what it was. We were just the pass through for them to get their oil over internationally.
I got a show topic question. So have there been any topics that you've done over the years that you're like, oh shit, we shouldn't have tackled that because it's too controversial, or you see an ebb and flow in your listeners? And I'm thinking like hot topic, like I don't know if you've gone into abortion or borders or climate or things where there's just some really passionate people on completely opposite sides.
We've done a few shows where we've talked about abortion, and my comfort level on abortion is that when it comes to abortion, I feel like there should be female representation for that conversation.
Sure.
Ultimately, because I'm of the mindset that for me, even though I am non-practicing Roman Catholic, I don't recognize why abortion should be like. I don't recognize abortion as being something that should just be birth control. That the state should not have to pay for something that is just being used when they could simply have contraceptive, to prevent as far as chiropractic medicine, it's not necessarily just about treating the symptoms, but also improving life so that you're doing what you need to do to prevent something in the future. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to abortion, my belief is the state should have nothing to do with it. I do recognize that there's probably some limitations that should be in place for abortion in situations where an individual could potentially just be using abortion but as far as I know, it wreaks havoc on one, their mental state.
Sure.
I have very few friends that have ever expressed that they had an abortion. But in every one of those situations, it destroyed them. Right. It wasn't something that they wanted to do. Or it's not something they wanted to do over and over and over.
Right.
We did have a pretty in-depth conversation about trans situation and trans in sports and things like that. And prior to me doing any research or investigation into it, just to look at the actual statistics and things like that, I was of the mindset that that athletes, when it came to men playing in women's sports after they've gone through the transition, that I was of the mindset that shouldn't be allowed. After doing the research and actually looking at the numbers and how many are actually involved, and suicide rates of people that have been denied the ability for this care, children and adults, like I changed my mind. I was like, fuck, it's just sports. Right. Like, who cares? Yeah. How important is it? Like, how important is it to you that your daughter compete against somebody who's 12 years old that has transitioned because either for medical reasons or for mental, of their own mental, to keep them from slitting their wrists? How important is it for your daughter to beat that person? Like, right. I ultimately can't wrap my mind around the idea that them winning a trophy is that important.
Right. I guess the argument would be safety is what people are saying. Essentially, like, I want my daughter to be safe. I don't have a daughter, but if I want my daughter to be safe, and the concern is the physical difference or the gap. But I mean, depending on age, some women at 7 to 12 mature and are bigger than
that's
dudes,
true.
except for when Randy dominated sports in that range.
I hit puberty.
He hit puberty
so early. I had a full beard in sixth grade, and I was 5'9". So I'm 5'9" right now. I was 5'9" when I was 9 years old, and I would play hockey and destroy. Yeah, I remember.
See, trans Randy at 11 would just be murdering.
Well, I still remember very well to this day. I was in probably fourth grade or fifth grade, probably 10 years old, playing hockey, which is pretty much all I did.
Yeah,
and I was a big guy, and you could hit. So it's full contact at probably 8 or 9 years old. And I remember a girl who was good enough to play on the male hockey team when we were playing against them. And I remember saying, what do I do with this? Like when this girl has the puck,
Pull her shirt over her head and hit her in the face.
Well, so
That's where it goes.
So the answer, and I still remember her name was Stacy.
Stacy.
And the answer was like, I mean, she's playing on the other team against us. You just treat her like any other person that you're playing against.
Yeah.
And she came around the net with her head down, and I hit her so hard, shoulder straight into her sternum, and I heard her like gasp and not really be able to get up. And like at that point, I was like, I'm there. I'll let her skate right by me because this is not right. What I just did was not right, even if I'm supposed to do it.
But I recognize that's the decision of her parents and her. You know, if she's going to compete in a sport that is male, I mean, if she's going to compete, you know, because I assume it was probably just like a co-ed league or you know.
Well, it was always just hockey.
Yeah,
and it was if a girl wanted to play with the guys, that was no problem.
We had
I mean, until, and I didn't really have a problem with it either. Like
Yeah.
if there was a girl, she would change in a different room or she would come in with all her
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And like, I never had a problem with it until the day when I did that. And it was like, I had hit other guys so hard that they couldn't get up before.
Yeah.
And like, I remember one guy I hit that like he had to get taken out in a stretcher, and I was like, hey, you want to play big boy games? This is kind of how it works. But when I hit her, it was something different about that moment that I still remember 30 something years later.
I mean, there's high schools where girls are on football teams.
Yeah.
They're, you know, they're the kicker or whatever.
Yes.
But I've seen YouTube videos of that female kicker just get clobbered.
Right.
And you know, it's a flag.
Yeah.
But I think again,
You're not allowed to hit the kicker in football, right? Or are you?
No,
No,
you're not.
no,
not
no,
supposed
Not
to.
blatantly.
Yeah.
Like even if you fall into them, that's a flag.
Yeah.
But like I look at that as the parents and the child have made a decision that they are going to play, that they want to play in that sport at that level.
Yes.
And if that's the decision, whether they are a trans child or they are the gender that they were born with, you know, I just leave that up to the parents. And if it, you know, a lot of what it comes down for me when it comes to like school sports and rec sports and things like that is, you know, the equipment. You know, let's make sure that all of the children are protected.
Mhm.
You know, if you knock a girl down, you're like, "Whoa, I'm so sorry." You gotta. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
That was,
Sorry.
that was my best
Sorry.
Canadian
That was
impression.
it was not bad either. I think maybe I'm just soft. Does that whole story make you think that
Yeah.
I'm so soft?
No,
I think trans Randy would be a scary 11-year-old.
That's what I was
if you're in a women's league.
because I
Especially
know a
with the
lot of
beard,
guys that
right?
that are big because I was talking to someone about this too, and I was like, the hard part for me is if they've already hit puberty. Like I'm thinking of my brother-in-law who's 6'2". His collarbones aren't getting smaller, no matter how much estrogen he takes. He's 6'2". He's got big hip. His femur is long. It's not.
Yeah, timing, I
Estrogen
guess,
is not making him shorter.
right.
So he's still going in at 6'2", and he was 6'2" in 10th grade. So even if at that point he took as many hormones, it just doesn't make his shoulders narrower. It doesn't make his femur shorter.
So
There's an advantage there for sure.
And that was one of the things that I researched was how much sports is actually impacted by trans athletes.
Mhm.
Minimal. I mean,
Right.
you're talking in maybe 1 in 1,000.
Right.
So it's almost a topic that doesn't really exist and it's not really a topic for the parents. You know, they want their child, regardless of whatever gender that they are, or they believe they are, that they
Sure.
want to be. A lot of it came down to it was almost a disagreement or anger from the side of the people that were unaffected by the actual situation. It almost always turned out to be
I
a parent of another child
Right.
that was, well, how is my child going to, you know, my daughter going to compete in swimming with this person that was male? That almost never happened. There were very few cases of that actually happening, and except until there was the one NCAA champion who won.
Yep.
And that's the one exception that I kind of look at, and you know, I don't know what their motivation was.
Right.
Did they transition because they were 63rd in the nation until they transitioned, and then now they're first in the nation? And if that was the case, then that's something that they have to hang on to.
Well,
for
and
the
that's a
rest
good
of their
point.
life.
Like I don't know anything about this. I just kind of chosen to stay away from the whole topic in general. But is there a when does the decision have to be made that you're transitioning? Like if you were full male today and then tomorrow you're like, you know what? I'm full female now and now enter into female sports. Like I don't know the timeline. Is there a timeline where it has
Yeah, I don't know.
See,
I think that there is the likelihood is when it comes to the doctor care in that situation, there's especially for children.
Yeah.
One of the things that legislation is trying to there are states in the country where what they're trying to do is make sure that there is gender affirming care, so that if a child is expressed that they don't believe, so they were born a male, they get to the age of like 7 or 8 and they're like, you as parents already recognize they dress differently from other other boys, or they dress differently.
Mm-hmm.
They behave differently. Those are things that kind of open up a parent's eyes and say, okay, there is something different here.
Right.
And then what happens is if the child comes forward, I don't believe anyone should push any child into a decision like that. But if the child comes forward and says, I'm being made fun of at school because I like this versus this,
Mm-hmm.
or I wear my clothes this way versus this way. And then in a lot of the states where gender affirming care is being codified, where the states are saying, yes, this needs to be something that's available. It's psychology, there's therapy to see. I have not found anywhere where there are legitimately people that are saying, child says that they're a girl versus a boy, let's get them switched. That's not happening anywhere. But if you watch the news, that's what you make it sounds like.
Right. The average person. And so because my wife worked in trauma, still does here and there. And a lot of the topic on the medical side of it was, and I didn't really think about it until she pointed it out, if a biological female shows up, like they got hit by a car or whatever, there's certain things that they have to check because they are a biological female.
Sure.
Are they pregnant? Being one of them. Or if there's a pain or discomfort here, and here, it's like, well, that's different for a biological female versus a biological male.
Right.
And that's where it got interesting, because it does become confusing if somebody is a biological female identifying as a male on the traumatic, like where they might be unconscious, or they may be, they can't communicate, or outside of, like, you see these abrasions here, and here, or bones sticking out, and it is a different type of care.
Yeah.
And that's where it does become a little black and white at some level, because I don't know how they make on the spot medical decisions that sometimes are life and death decisions based on gender.
Yeah.
And I don't know how often that is, but it was a good point.
And that's ultimately where I come up. We live in a technologically advanced civilization that has the ability to create registries that it's not just your driver's license, where there's, you have an identifier on your driver's license or something in the state level that identifies you. But we have the technology and the ability to create registries so that if an individual is in a car accident and can't say, that I can't receive the, you go to the doctor's office now, my like I said, my daughter's having surgery tomorrow. And one of the things they already know is what she's allergic to.
Sure.
They know, they already know that based on her weight, how much anesthesia she'll, they know what the requirements are.
Yep.
And I think that if we were able to take that and expand that to, I'm not saying putting chips under people's arms, but I'm not saying it.
Right.
I mean, it
gets scary though with that. Yeah.
Because people think, one of the things that I hear all the time.
It's trust. Well, it's trust. It's like, if you could fully trust that this chip in my arm is going to,
Only
be
for
run
your good.
for my good, then it's no brainer.
It takes a lot of trust.
It does.
I mean, I am uncomfortable with the idea of someone being able to identify me purely by me walking under a light post that has a camera on it.
Right.
But then I think, well, what do I have to hide? But it's like, what my comfort level with it might be different with somebody else's comfort level, because they don't want to be tracked.
Well, Randy uses DuckDuckGo because he's concerned Google's spying on him.
I always
what do
thought. Well, no, I always kind of thought
Talk in
that.
your microphone, please.
Do you know DuckDuck? Do you know DuckDuckGo?
No, is that a browser?
It's a Google alternative.
Is it really?
Yes, and I love it because you just don't get tracked. You don't get pumped full of ads all the time for
That's
stuff
not
that you
bad.
search for.
That's not bad.
Sometimes they think
I
I'm in
love
Sh-
it.
They
I
think I'm in
like being
Charlotte.
tracked, and I like when they market
You want-
my
you
style,
want
what I like. It makes it easier for me.
Well, when they come out with their own cell phone software, or do
Right.
they already have it?
Probably.
They have their
Yeah.
they have an app, but have they
They have their own
expanded
app that
into?
works, and it's on iOS and Google Play Store. It's its own thing.
Oh boy.
But do they have? Are they?
there's-
Is there a possibility that they're going to have their own like phone system, like operating
I
system?
doubt that.
Okay.
Well, the idea, but the idea of it is that it's not connected in the same way where you could look something up without having to worry that you're going to get spammed about it forever,
Yeah.
or that it's just.
Well, I have friends that do all of their searches in like privacy mode, which ultimately every time I see them pull up they hand me their phone to read something off their phone. I'm like, well, you're in privacy mode. And I'm like, if I'm holding this, how much porn is like am I one swipe away
Right.
from like,
Yes.
it's just, but like, I think that's a lot of what it comes down
That's
to
exactly
is like, if there is trust in the system, then yes, people are more comfortable with it. But it's so likely that the advertisements, Google uses every single one of your searches to add
Always.
to advertising that they
Yes.
can do.
And then we pay them
Yeah.
to
we
send
order
our ads.
we order their junk.
But even the whole vaccine thing that just came out over the last 4 or 5 years, in my opinion, a person should be able to make a medical decision on their own
Agreed.
without having to be forced to do it.
Yep.
Even if it could be life-changing, life-altering, if the person can make the decision, they should be able to make their own medical decision.
Yeah.
But if there's no if there's no way to not, like, if you have a microchip in your arm and you're walking into a place and the moment you goes in, it slams up and it says it's been 10 years and 1 month since your last tetanus shot. You better go get that tetanus shot. You're like, it doesn't sound great to me. It sounds like,
Well, it
there's
sounds
too
like a
much.
recipe for discrimination in general.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Well,
Like
you had companies that were not that employees would come back after COVID.
Right.
That there were vaccination requirements for them to come back.
Right.
But then, like, some of those companies, if it was that these were individuals that wanted to come back to work in the office. There was a vaccine requirement, and actually, most of those companies have relaxed on the vaccine requirement because the vaccine doesn't keep you from getting it.
Right.
The idea is the vaccine has given you a part of, or you have now a part of that virus simulated in you, so that it just doesn't kill you. But but a lot of those companies that did have vaccine requirements have completely laxed on. They've let those go because and ultimately science moved way too quickly. And I say way too
100%.
quickly, but science moved so quickly to get this vaccine to the point where 15,000 people weren't dying a day that there was so many gaps in what was there. And then you had 4 or 5 different companies developing the vaccines, and one vaccine's a little bit
It
different.
was
than
just
the
a
other.
race to money too. Like it was a massive
people
race
making
to
billion.
money.
Like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
That's a scenario where if the government said nobody's making $1 off of this, I would have been like, all right, that sounds a little bit better. When you say there's going to be billionaires and
massive,
trillionaires,
Yeah.
that sounds like they have an incentive to do something too quickly.
Yeah, and there's a lab in China that made a ton of money off of it, whether they're selling bat parts or something. Bat stew, I don't know what it was. Everybody's ordering it now.
All right, well, we're gonna have to wrap this
Yeah,
up.
yeah,
We've been rolling for a while. Do you want to tell everyone how to find your podcast and where and what it looks like?
Yeah, so we have go ahead.
I was gonna say, and if anybody wants to slide in your DMs.
Oh, they want to be a guest.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
McMaster.
Oh, I've reached out to his office. I've actually gotten as far as his press secretary to even come down and sit in his office to do the interview. But McMaster's has no interest.
He's a big listener of this show, so
Is he?
probably yeah.
Oh, Henry. Listen,
You could talk directly to
Let me
him,
speak
right?
in your language. A boy, I said a boy. He is foghorn leghorn to me.
He
Like
is.
that is that. But yeah, no. You can reach out to us. The website address is theallaboutnothing.com. And we record weekly. We actually took this week off because it had been 64 episodes since we had taken a break. But yeah, theallaboutnothing.com. There are links to all of the podcast platforms as well as all of our previous episodes and things like that. Don't go too far back, because then you get back into the episodes around, episode 2 through like 30, where it's just me and it's dated. But yeah, we, the idea is that we talk about news, sports, politics, social interest issues, music. We have entertainers and things like that on.
Nice.
We're pretty politically heavy right now because of the election season, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
Nice. Who are your other partners on the show?
So Zach King, he and I work together, and he's done a couple other podcasts here and there, and he's the guy that does most of the impressions.
Nice.
Trent Clark, he is our I want to say our comedy effect, because his opinions usually differ from ours.
Gotcha.
Trent holds himself as the he's the black guy on the show, to which we go.
And
once,
he is black, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which actually is a funny topic. How many? If you just heard the name Trent Clark, would you think black guy or white guy?
That's a good point.
His parents, he claims that his parents named him Trent Clark so that he could be the
Either.
white guy being interviewed for a job.
Right.
Yeah. So
I could see that. It'd be great if he was the black guy on the show and he was white.
yeah, YouTube would give that
I don't
away.
think
That
that's
would be
allowed.
tough. That would be tough.
Although we do joke, we did go through a stint where we were joking with Zach about the fact that he was constantly asking if he could do blackface on the show, but but he put a stop to that. He was highly offended that we kept going to that joke.
Sounds like Justin Trudeau in Canada. He's big on that.
I will just ask, did you vote in the election? I won't ask you who you voted for, but did you ever get an opportunity? Because Trudeau's been around for a while.
I would never. I mean, if you offered me $1 million to vote for Trudeau, I would still not do it.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's just one vote. I mean,
Exactly.
$1 million,
I
$1
wouldn't.
million?
I wouldn't do it because I wouldn't be able to live with myself.
If somebody gave me $1 million, knowing voting in South Carolina, knowing how the election will go from South Carolina,
Right.
I would probably.
Would you? You'd be able to live with it.
It's one
God,
vote.
yeah.
It's
I could do a
I don't
lot
think
for $1 million.
I don't think.
We could come up with a list of
That's
things I'd
good.
do.
Million
maybe
$1 million
if it
money.
came up, I would just throw my name in
Yeah.
there. Well, we appreciate you being on the show.
No, I
Thanks.
appreciate
It was
I
fun.
appreciate the
coming out.
opportunity to come out and hang out. This is a great studio.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry that you're losing Brad. Or does everyone know about that yet?
They might not.
Did I
This is
break that
last show.
news?
This is
You
last
just-
show.
Yeah.
No. We have one more.
Okay.
This week. That's right.
Yo. We're just grinding them out to the very
Yeah.
last day.
Just double and triple and
pushing. He's never been broken before, but just wait.
All right. Appreciate
Thanks a lot.
it. Bye.
Thank you.
We're here for the health of it.
For the health of it.